Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Dirt Nap City. I think I've got a good one for you today. I've got somebody who is interesting and dead, and was interesting before they were dead.
Oh, that's rare.
And interesting after they're dead. And, you know, if we hold that Dia de los Muertos rule that we have had where somebody dies twice, right?
Yep.
The first time when they really die and the second time when people stop talking about them. I think this person is as close to immortality as we can get.
Really? Okay. Well, that's a good sign. That's somebody that I'm interested in hearing about.
I could never picture a time where people aren't talking about this person.
Okay. Well, dude, let's bring it. So, for those of you that don't know the rules, Alex picked the topic today. He will be selecting and talking about an interesting dead person. I don't know who that person is. However, you, as the listener, might know who it is. Probably do, because you clicked on this podcast. Or maybe you just have it on random on Shuffle, Dirt Nap City Shuffle. That's a dance that we like to do, where you listen to every episode in a random order. And if in that case, you don't know who it is, Alex is going to give me some clues. He's a great clue giver, by the way, a much better clue giver than I am, apparently. And he's going to give them to me until I guess it, or he just gives up on me and he tells me who it is.
I'm pretty confident about, I have one big clue. I've already given you a clue. I've already said this person's as close to immortality as you can get, in that people will always be talking about this person or saying his name.
Okay. So, you know, there's,
you want to try to guess
Christ.
Already? No. I already told you that's arrogant to do that.
That's off limits.
Yeah, sure.
George Washington.
Let me give you this clue. I would say, other than John Hancock, and maybe even including John Hancock, has the most famous signature out there.
Well, Ben Franklin, he has that big curvy B, you know, on the thing.
More famous than that.
More famous as a signature. Let me think for a second. So, and you kind of took me with John Hancock that he might be a statesman, but that
No.
could be unrelated. Okay,
That's unrelated.
He's not a statesman. He has a famous signature.
Well, let me tell you, he was born in 1901 in Chicago and died in 1966 in Burbank. So you know what that means. That means we have another 20th century icon.
He's an actor.
The 20th century. No.
Oh, Sherwood Schwartz.
I've never seen his signature.
Well, I imagine with the SH and an SH, it was probably pretty good.
Okay, well, Sherwood Schwartz is a good guess, but I'm guessing the Burbank part got you on the Sherwood Schwartz, right?
Yes, actually. Yeah. Burbank Studios. Wait a minute. Bugs Bunny, the guy who drew Bugs Bunny, he had a signature at the end of his cartoons. Chuck somebody.
It's not Chuck Jones.
Chuck Jones.
Not Chuck Jones.
But good that you knew who I was talking about.
Yeah, and along those same lines, but even more famous than Chuck Jones.
It's not Walt Disney.
It is Walt Disney.
All right, here's the funny thing about that. Remember I was talking about having a guest on?
Yeah.
That was the episode she and I were talking about. Wow. Okay, Walt Disney. Well, then you snooze, you lose, Emily. Sorry.
There's a lot to do here. There's a lot to do. That's a big life. 65 years of life, but quite a legacy and a lot of things to go. So we're going to talk about some of the movies, some of the techniques, how he got his start. We're going to talk about the parks. We're going to talk about some of the IP, answer some of those rumors, and some of the more controversial things, but and then a couple of little surprises that maybe you didn't know about Walt Disney, right?
Yeah. No, I'm stoked. This was on my target list, and so you beat me to it, but I'm happy about it because I've done a little research, and I think I'll be able to add some value.
Okay, good. Well, so there's kind of two kinds of people. There's the kind of people that think of Walt Disney as just kind of the ultimate in kind of quality entertainment, wholesome um, family entertainment. Then there's the kind that kind of reject all of that and think of Disney as kind of the example of crass commercialism, um, boiling everything down into kind of a saccharine way, taking history and kind of whitewashing it. I guess there's a third type of person who gets married at the Disney World, uh, but that's a whole nother. Where do you fall in this spectrum?
Um, so personally, I feel like he's both. You know, obviously a big capitalist, made a lot of money, and but also a visionary. I mean, his vision for Epcot originally was actually a city. It wasn't supposed to be just a tourist attraction, but it was supposed to be a place people lived, and it was set up for success. Right? It was set up for a minimal need for cars. It was walkable. It was sustainable. It was one of the first green cities. You know, before a green city was a thing. But at the same time, you know, Disney is definitely, especially with Walt's passing many years ago, because he never even saw Walt Disney World come to fruition. Right? He was around for Disneyland, but his brother carried on for Disney World and Epcot and all the stuff that became the mega. So I'm divided. You know, I definitely appreciate his creativity, but I feel like maybe the man was a better person than the company has become.
Maybe, yeah. And I think it's important to remember that he did die in 1966, like you said, before Disney World even opened. So a lot of his vision might not have taken the same path to Disney if he had lived. I mean, he died pretty young, pretty young. If he had lived into the 1990s, who knows what Disney would have become? But definitely, it might not have gone the way it is today. So let's get into this a little bit.
Yeah.
So, like a lot of the 20th century people that we talk about, he tried to join the army when he was like 16.
He and Colonel Sanders.
Yeah, it seemed to be a thing, but he got rejected. He tried to join the army in 1918. This is World War One. But he forged the date and joined the Red Cross as an ambulance driver.
Ah.
And then they shipped him to France. I love the idea of this 16, 17-year-old kid, them shipping him to France as an ambulance
Driving
driver.
a French ambulance.
So, but he arrived after the armistice, after the war was over, but he drew cartoons on the side of the ambulance. He always liked to draw, so he drew cartoons on the side of the ambulance, and his work actually got published in the Stars and Stripes, which is the newspaper, you know, that the troops would read.
Yeah.
And then he came back to the U.S. and got a job as a commercial illustrator at the age of 18 and moved to California at the age of 18 with his brother and started a studio called Disney Brothers Studio with his brother Roy. And they kind of got on early with the technology called cell animation. You're familiar with cell animation, what that
Yeah,
is?
sure. Where they're drawing each individual picture onto a cellulite, a piece of clear plastic that is used in the film.
Yeah, like a transparency.
Yeah.
But they don't have to draw each individual picture because of the transparency nature. So the background can stay the same. So if
Ah,
you picture
yes.
like Steamboat Willie, for example, which was like his first movie with Mickey Mouse, he's on the boat. All the water and the boat and everything is one picture. You only have to draw it one time, and then all the stuff that's happening in the foreground, you can change that drawing, but the background stays the same. If you think about pretty much any 2D cartoon from back in the day, they always had kind of this static background that was happening, and then all
Yeah,
the
like Tom and Jerry, you know, it was always
yeah.
the mouse hole in the side of the wall.
Right. So if there's a table with a bowl on it or something, you can have that be the background for the whole time. And if you next time you watch a cartoon, just kind of notice how the background never really moves and there's the foreground that's doing all the movement. Well, that was a big change in having to as opposed to having to draw every single frame. So that was the technology back then. Now, of course, all animation is done digitally. And looks quite different. But the last cell animation movie was actually Winnie the Pooh in 2011. The
Oh, wow.
last Disney movie using cell animation.
Okay, so they were still doing it old style, old school there for Winnie the
Yeah.
Pooh in 2011.
You can't really tell the difference too much. Like The Simpsons started with cell animation, now they use digital. I mean, it's probably not that perceptible to the naked eye. It probably saves a ton of hours though.
Yeah, and ultimately it's probably just a little bit more precise, right? I mean, that background isn't going to change if it's digital unless you want it to.
And now you can change the background. So yeah, if you think of movies, the more recent Disney movies, they're pretty much a lot more complex, right? Um, and then you get into the real digital, the stuff that's not as 2D, like the Pixar kind of things. I mean, that's just a whole nother level.
Yeah, the rendering, the not only the technology but the computer power required to render a frame of a Pixar movie was unthinkable in the 60s or the
Oh
70s
yeah,
or even the 80s, and then computers caught up and that's what it's doing. It's just doing a bunch of math to say, all right, this is where this point is in time, this is where this point is as it moves,
yeah,
through frame to frame. So, yeah, technology has really enabled a lot more immersive and realistic looking cartoons.
for sure, and kind of change the definition of what animation is too, right?
True.
So he developed Mickey Mouse in 1928. So he was like 27 years old, and he developed Mickey Mouse. He originally called him Mortimer Mouse, but his wife thought it was too pompous. Mortimer was too pompous,
Mortimer. It sounds like a wizard.
and she suggested the idea of Mickey. Also, the gloves. I don't know if you've ever heard this, but a rat's hands aren't very cute, right? They're just
Well,
kind
they
of
don't really have hands. They have 4
nasty
feet.
little, yeah, but they're kind of gross looking. So that's why he has the gloves, because it would be kind of
More tenable.
yeah, he doesn't. Yeah, that's the part that would really look like a mouse or a rat or something like that.
Oh, I'm sure there's a
Um,
lot of parts that would actually look like a
yeah,
mouse or a rat. But he's drawn as a caricature of that.
pretty amazing though. Almost 100 years ago, Mickey Mouse came out, and Steamboat Willie was the first sound cartoon. If you've ever been to, I think they run it constantly at Disney World. There's a theater you can go in, and they're playing Mickey Mouse. But it was the first sound cartoon, and actually Walt did the voice of Mickey Mouse until 1947, well
Oh
into
wow.
his so like 20 years he did the voice. He started slowly introducing other characters into his cartoons, like Pluto was introduced
Yeah.
in 1930. That was Mickey's dog, right?
The dog. Yep.
And then Goofy was introduced in 1932. I think school's still out on what exactly Goofy is.
Yeah, I was gonna say Goofy's a dog, right?
No, I don't know. I don't think so. I think there's mixed
Yeah.
on that. I mean, Goofy's just
He's just
Goofy's just
goofy.
Goofy, man. Um, Donald Duck was introduced in 1934. Yeah, and there's some really interesting kind of wartime cartoons that include Donald Duck. So yeah, there's interesting things. But the Three Little Pigs came out in 1933, and that was the most successful short animation of all time. It won the Academy Award. I
Wow.
think they actually started having to invent awards for short animations. Um, and at this time, Walt decided that he was going to invest in. He thought the story was as important as anything else, so he invested in a story department of people that would come up with stories, and it was kind of separated from the animators. He wanted animators to just draw, and people that knew story to write story. But usually the stories that they came up with weren't original. They were based on fairy tales, sometimes popular fairy tales, sometimes kind of obscure fairy tales from other countries, and still do that. I mean, like even to this day, you see cartoons that usually aren't original. They're even I know this wasn't a Disney, but like Shrek was apparently some kind of fable from Scotland, I think.
And also the reason that he was smart to invest in storytellers was that the novelty, I think, of just a moving picture had worn off, right?
Yeah,
Back in Edison's day, And when when they were using these devices that were showing moving pictures, 30-second little snippets, people were fascinated because it was like magic. But that was becoming more commonplace. And so to just see a guy jumping up and down or lifting weights or whatever, or a horse running, was no longer enough. You had to tell a story along with it. And I think that he was very smart to invest in that. He realized content is king.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Three Little Pigs was 1933. In 1934, he decided to come up with a full length animated movie.
Was that Snow White?
Was Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. It this took animation to another level. In fact, while he was making it, people were making fun of him and calling it Disney's Follies. They're saying there's no way this guy's going to make any money on this. It was 3 times over budget, cost $1.5 million in 1934. Imagine what that must have sounded like making a cartoon for $1.5 million.
Right. And it wasn't even a proven medium to make money. It was new.
Exactly. And usually these were things that were probably done before well, even movies weren't that, hadn't been around that long, and sound movies hadn't been around that long. But this one, he really decided to take it up to another level. He brought in animals into the studio so his animators could study the movement of you talked about how Thomas Edison, slowed down the frames and they could really study the movement. This was doing that, but drawing replicas of this. So they would bring in animals to the studio. They bring in actors and not just how animals would move, but how people moved.
Yeah.
So the movie was released in 1937. It took like almost 4 years to make this movie. It made $6.5 million, cost $1.5 million to make. At the time, it was the most successful movie of all time.
Like not just cartoons,
in terms of box office. Yeah. In terms of box office success.
Wow.
It won an honorary Academy Award because there was no award for animated. And they actually gave him 1 Oscar and then 7 miniature Oscars.
Oh, wow. Very, very clever.
Yeah. I thought that was too. So in 1938, immediately started working on Pinocchio and Fantasia. But the thing is, now we're leading up to World War II, and people have other pursuits. They're not really concerned about going to the movies. So neither one of those movies did well at the box office. We kind of think of these as classics now, but did not do well at the box office. And the company went in debt. And by 1941, he was faced with having to figure out we got to go public. They were
had to raise some capital.
They were losing money. So they made Dumbo next, but Dumbo was actually made on the cheap, and it was made in 1941, and actually it did really well. It made it very cheaply. But they started using their other characters, like I said, like Donald Duck, to sell war bonds. And then Disney started making propaganda films. I think if you've listened to our other episodes, and just if you've taken history classes, that everyone pitched in during World War II. Everybody kind of took what they did and applied it. And there's some really interesting movies on YouTube. One in particular that won an Academy Award called Der Fuhrer's Face.
Yes. That was also a Spike Jones song, wasn't it?
Yes. This movie was really weird. It's about Donald Duck, who's a Nazi, and he's constantly going through doing Heil Hitler, Heil Hitler, Heil Hitler, and they're talking about the master race and all this. And then at the very end, he kind of wakes up. You see it was a dream the whole time. And he says in his Donald Duck voice, he says, I'm so glad to be waking up as a citizen of the United States of America. He looks on his bedstand and he sees he looks out his window and he sees the Statue of Liberty. Statue of Liberty. He's got the flag on the wall and he says, I'm so glad to be a citizen of the United States of America. It's just, but we're very, that's how Disney was kind of making up some of the shortfall by taking some of this government money for propaganda films. Made Bambi in 1942, and that underperformed also, lost money. And Bank of America, he came to Bank of America, and they were in trouble. Disney was in trouble, and the head of Bank of America at the time said, he said to his board, he said, "This Disney, if you look, he's got a successful movie, and then one that's not successful, and then one that is, and wasn't isn't." He says, "But you can't really judge somebody by their least successful things. You have to look at the potential this guy's got, and I believe in him, so let's help him out." That changed everything because they got an infusion of cash. Then they got a big loan from Bank of America, and then he just started churning out hits. Cinderella came out in 1950. Then he started live action movies like Treasure Island came out in 1950.
Oh, yeah.
Also,
I remember that.
Robin Hood in 1952. Alice in Wonderland, the animated 1951. And Peter Pan, Lady and the Tramp, Sleeping Beauty. I mean, these were just churning them out.
Classics.
101 Dalmatians in 1961. Mary Poppins in 1964. I mean, that's quite a run. As a producer, Walt Disney holds the record for the most Academy Awards in history. And he's also the most nominated individual. He has 22 Oscars and 59 nominations.
And then 7 little Oscars.
And 7 little ones, too. I don't know if you've ever heard of this place, but in San Francisco, at the Presidio in San Francisco.
It's an old military base.
Yeah. Have you ever seen the Walt Disney Family Museum?
No, I've been to the Presidio, but I've never seen the Walt Disney Family Museum.
There's this really cool place, and it's probably I don't know when it was built, but not that long ago. It's probably less than 20 years old. It's this beautiful place with beautiful views of the Golden Gate Bridge. And it kind of is a Disney museum that's not for kids. I wouldn't take kids there. They'd think it was boring, but it kind of has a lot of this history of the man and kind of some of these artifacts that we're talking about, but it's not at all like an offshoot of, it's not a theme park or anything like that. It's just a very cool.
Interesting to know. One of those probably things in San Francisco that is, just like the rest of San Francisco, there's so much to do that you'd be like, this would be a big deal in another city, but in San Francisco, it's not because there's so many other things.
But it is cool if you're interested in more information just about the guy. I just did 30 years of this guy in like 10 minutes. So, there's a lot of backstory there, a lot of interesting stuff. So I don't know if you've heard of the National Film Registry, but there's a group of films that have kind of been declared as some of the iconic films of all time. And he's got 12 movies, Disney has 12 movies on that list. I was wondering if you could guess, see how many of those you
What sounds a bit like Rainbow Connection was for Jim Henson, right? It was one of these songs that was preserved as part of the nation's history, right?
So these would be 12 movies that if you had to see the history of film and some of the achievements.
All right, I'll guess. I'll guess Fantasia. I'll guess Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs.
Yeah.
I'll guess. Trying to think of a lot. Mary Poppins. Was that
no. Actually, Mary Poppins was the first movie I ever saw, though.
Really?
Yeah.
You remember it? Were you old enough to remember?
I do, because then I really liked it after that. I really enjoyed that movie. It was probably had probably been out for 10 years by the time I saw it.
What were the others that are on this registry?
So Bambi.
Oh, yeah.
Beauty and the Beast from 1991.
Oh, that's a great film.
Cinderella.
Dressed in Yellow.
Dumbo. The Lion King from 1994.
Oh, another great one.
The Little Mermaid from 1989, which started what people call the second Disney Renaissance, right? So it's interesting that after he died, they kind of got out of the animation game. And they didn't make an animated movie from, if you could call Mary Poppins was somewhat, and some of it was animated, but they didn't make another one until 1989, the Little Mermaid. So it was a good 25 years before but they made a lot of those live action movies when we were kids, like the movies with Dean Jones and Kurt
Yeah,
Russell and
almost like after school specials.
the Shaggy Dog,
The Shaggy DA.
Shaggy DA. I mean,
Yeah.
Shaggy DA, the Herbie
Herbie the
movies.
Love Bug.
Those were the kind of Disney movies they were making when we were kids. They didn't
Yeah.
make cartoons when we were kids.
Yeah. Some of those were okay, but not always.
Dean Jones had a pretty good career about that.
Was
and
Goonies a Disney movie?
no, I don't think so. No.
Okay.
But the other one I remember when we were kids was The Incredible Mr. Limpet. You remember that with Don Knotts?
No. Oh, goodness. Don Knotts.
Pinocchio's on that list. Sleeping Beauty, Toy Story, 1995. And the only one from this century, the only Disney movie from this century, you want to guess?
Would it be Star Wars? Something to do with Star Wars?
Wall-E.
Oh, it was sci-fi. What have you seen Wall-E? That's a
2008.
That's a great film.
I didn't love Wall-E, to tell you the truth.
It was very slow, but it's really beautiful.
Yeah. I maybe I could use a rewatch of that.
My kids and I watched it for some reason like 2 years ago, and I liked it better that time than I did the first time.
I was gonna say when it came out, I had a 4-year-old, and it was probably too slow for him. You know, at the time. I know he didn't like it at the time, so if he didn't like it, I didn't like it.
Right.
So let's talk. Those are the movies. Let's talk about the parks. Of course, one of the big Disney legacies is the parks, and what do they call it? The happiest place on earth, right?
Yeah.
So Disneyland was open in 1955 in Anaheim. He decided he wanted a place for people to go, and they could just kind of have the adventure that they enjoyed as children. I don't think that he necessarily thought of building a place for kids to go, but for place for people to go to be kids again. It just so happened that, kids liked it too, but I don't think he designed a place for children to go and play. But, if you think about it, they've got the 4 different lands there. They've got Main Street USA and Adventureland, Frontierland, I guess 5, Fantasyland and Tomorrowland.
Okay.
And this idea of, enjoying the Treasure Island part of the adventure and the trains and then the futuristic things and just that whole thing about being a kid again. They had the opening ceremony to Disneyland was broadcast on ABC, and 70 million people tuned in to watch the opening ceremony.
In 1950 something.
1955. Wow. That's like Super Bowl numbers.
Yeah, that's huge.
That everybody was. I mean, granted, there was only like 3 networks.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot else to watch, but a lot of people tuned in. That's amazing.
And 3.5 million people visited Disneyland the first year. And of course, Anaheim, there was kind of nothing going on in that part of Southern California back then. So it really kind of re-energized that part of California. They had a railroad connecting all those different lands. And like I said, it was a place where you could kind of go and be a kid again. Then ABC said, well, as part of our support, we want you to have a presence on our network. So they came up with a daily TV show called the Mickey Mouse Club. Yeah. And people from our parents' generation really loved the Mickey Mouse Club. And that was a place where they had like kids, like kind of teenage kids doing, that you can kind of
stuff.
Wanted very wholesome stuff. Davy Crockett. They play different shows every day, but kind of they had a rotating group of
like a studio audience or an audience of these kids, a group of them. I mean, I haven't seen it that often, but I remember black and white. They're all wearing their ears, their Mouseketeer ears, and then they're kind of sitting on these risers in a semicircle, and maybe there's an adult that's talking to them, and they all have lines they give. Kind of cheesy, but
and then they would intersperse that with actual content with things like Davy Crockett that were shows that they produce, and
it was like an early Dave Chappelle show.
Yeah, it was like a variety show for kids, but it was on every day.
Yeah,
for kids when they came home from.
And were there some famous people that?
Yeah, and Annette Funicello, I think, was the most famous one, who later came to do kind of the beach movies.
Yeah. Frankie and Annette.
Frankie Avalon. Yeah. But as we've talked about before, this was these kids that were watching this, these were the baby boomers. And this was kind of the first generation where teenager was a demographic. So it was very influential to boomers, to the boomer generation. In 1964, we had the World's Fair. World's Fair used to be a bigger deal than it is now, but they used to have World's Fairs. And World's Fair would kind of be celebrate the country. It was in New York. In fact, if you go to where the Mets play or where the U.S. Open is in New York, you'll see some of the remnants of that World's Fair.
Of the World's Fair.
1964. And he contributed 4 exhibits to that. One, It's a Small World.
Okay.
The Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln, the Carousel of Progress, and the Magic Skyway. And they all, after the World's Fair, got installed at Disneyland.
They moved them to Disney. Okay.
Yeah, so It's a Small World. That's where it got a start. Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln turned into the Hall of Presidents. It was an animatronic Abe Lincoln that would talk about some of his achievements. And then the Carousel of Progress. I don't know if you've ever seen this, but this is
I've never even heard of that one.
Oh, my gosh. If you go to Disney World, this still exists. And it's this ride that you take with this family. I mean, you go through their living room and it goes from back when there was like just radio, and then you kind of go through there, and then the family kind of evolves into the future. And I think when I first went there, it was, the year 2000 was, they were trying to imagine what the year 2000 was like. So I think it's funny because if you go today, well, the whole idea when you go to Disney today, that whole Tomorrowland, it still kind of reeks of a 1960s version of what the future is going to be.
Yeah. There is a certain there. That's almost its own genre of movie. This I guess forward-looking past or retro future.
Yeah, like the Jetsons.
Yeah.
All that kind of. And I eat that stuff up. I love it.
It's got this cool kind of groovy vibe. You imagine space cocktails and like jazz music and that kind of stuff.
When you think about it, back then, when you thought about the future, you thought of endless possibilities, and you thought of us living on other planets and living underwater. I remember when I was
now we think of global warming.
Exactly.
And,
like everything is and AI taking over the world and nothing good. It's never like when somebody says, tell me about the future, you almost brace yourself.
Yeah. It's like, where are flying cars? Where are our jetpacks? Where's my teleporter?
And maybe that's because we grew up at kind of the end of the century and it was this promise of a new century that was coming up. But I remember taking out a book in the library when I was in elementary school, and it talked about how, by the year 2010, half the people would be living underwater, and it had all these cool pictures of these cities underwater. And I just love that stuff.
Yeah.
So as you mentioned before, his big vision was Epcot. And this idea that he would have this, you know what Epcot stands for, right?
It's something City of Tomorrow.
Experimental Prototype City of Tomorrow.
Yeah. I knew it was something City of Tomorrow.
The idea that you could like reimagine cities using technology and using kind of what people want, safety, security, and you could design a city where people would want to live. So he had this vision, and he was going to use land that was really cheap, swampland in Florida.
In Florida, yeah.
So before
DeSantis got in the way.
So before he was able to do that, they decided, well, in order to get the capital for this, let's build a replica of Disneyland in Florida, and let's make it even bigger, and let's call it Magic Kingdom.
Yeah, because they were sort of landlocked in Anaheim. I think they bought that piece of land, and then stuff grew up around it, and all of a sudden they couldn't expand really. But Florida was like endless possibilities as far as their space they could take over.
Yeah, because it's unlike the rest of Florida. It's not on the coast. It's like the only thing in Florida that's in the middle of the state, right?
Right.
So it's all just swampland that was cheap. So in 1965, they started development of what we now know as Disney World. They called it the Magic Kingdom, and it was going to have this new city, Epcot. Well, Epcot, he died before Disney World was open. He died before Epcot was finished. Epcot was finally finished in 1982.
And I went there in 84,
I,
actually.
I think I went there in 82 or 83. I was there right at the beginning also, and I
Yeah.
loved it. I thought
Yeah, I
it
did
was
too.
really
Actually,
cool.
my grandparents, we spent Christmas 84. My grandparents had moved to Florida from Kansas, and they took us to Disneyland or Disney World, Magic Kingdom on Christmas Day, and then I think the day after we went to Epcot. And I preferred Epcot. I thought Epcot was just so cool.
Oh, I've never heard anybody say. I agree with you. I thought it was so cool, but um, people don't feel like that today. I think that a lot of people make fun of Epcot, but I think it's cool, and I still like Epcot.
Well, again, in the 80s, I think I remember this is really silly, but my favorite thing, the thing that made the biggest impression of me on Epcot, I loved going around to all the different pavilions from different countries, right? So going to Germany and Japan and Australia and, just these cultures and food. We did that a lot and had a little snack in each place. But this is like the most sort of simple thing that just blew my mind. We were walking through a part of it or waiting in line or something to get on a ride, and they had these fountains and they had jets of water underground, and the water would spray up, and it was kind of like the Palazzo in Las Vegas.
Mhm.
Like it was this little water show, but the water would go in a perfect it was like almost like a snake jumping through the air, and it would go from fountain to fountain, like, and you could put your hand up and block it if you wanted to, you'd get wet. But I thought that was just, I'd never seen water move like that, and I
Yeah,
remember just thinking that was the coolest thing ever.
those are called the dancing fountains.
The
Those are
dancing
all
fountains.
those were all made by people that are called Imagineers.
Yeah.
And Imagineers design all that stuff. And they're just engineers that are creative, that look to do cool stuff, to have a cool experience. I was actually fortunate a number of years ago to do a behind the scenes tour of Disney at a conference that I went to, and I saw a lot of I went under the ground to the tunnels.
Oh yeah. No, I've heard that it's like you can pop up in pretty much anywhere in the park, right? That's how the characters move around.
Yeah, and because you don't want to see people from Adventureland in Tomorrowland walk into their car, so you can the workers there, you'll only see them in their habitat. They're in their
Yeah, yeah. You don't see them smoking a cigarette behind building 6.
yeah. But I learned a lot of cool things about that. One of the ones that sticks out the most for me was that back in the day they realized that the smell there's two smells that make people buy food. The smell of Do you know what those smells might be? That
Uh
make people want to buy food?
I'm going to say something frying, like French fries or
That's a good guess. The smell of popcorn
ah,
and the smell of mustard. Something about the
really?
smell of mustard makes you want a hot dog, right? Or a pretzel or
So
something.
if you put mustard on on popcorn, imagine what that would be like.
Yeah. So what they did was they originally started by just popping popcorn as early in the day as they could, so people would start getting that smell. But it's hard to make mustard smell unless you like dump a bunch of mustard on the ground. So they had these devices that were they were bags that would be filled with the scent of mustard, and then they would use it was pretty primitive. They would use like
They were like no, what are those things? Bellows.
yeah, and they would use the sticks to waft the smell of mustard and popcorn into the air. And by 9 a.m., they're selling hot dogs, they're selling popcorn, just because people are. That's the kind of manipulative stuff that
Yeah.
you
So
get.
so you could be like your job could be chief mustard waffer.
Yeah, they said that they still do that, but they do it digitally now, and just
Of
like
course they
everything
do.
else,
Of course they do.
everything else is
There's no actual smell. It's just a chip in your brain
yeah.
that makes you think you're smelling it.
Exactly. So it sounds like you've been to Disney a few times.
No, just that once. 84. I went to Disneyland one time when I was going to school at USC. Just went there for the day just because I was there and it was fun. And then went to Disney World in 84 with my grandparents.
And you never brought your kids there?
Never did.
Hmm.
And kind of getting back to your original question, that's never been a high priority I think I would have a problem a little bit. I mean, I realize it's designed to be manufactured happiness, right? It's designed to be everything is perfect. I like for me the lack of authenticity of that and the sort of fakeness of that, just like Las Vegas, it's a little bit of a turnoff.
Yeah, and that's where and that's a legitimate take, and I think one that a lot of people share. There's a fine line between kind of
Brilliant and stupid.
making a sterile, guaranteed fun environment and making it so artificial that it's a turnoff to the parents.
One other thing that sticks in my mind, you mentioned the World's Fair earlier, and this is a little bit of an aside. I think it might have been 84 as well. We might have done a lot of traveling around that time, 82, 84, 1980. The World's Fair was in New Orleans. Do you remember what year that was?
I think it was either 82. I think it was 86. Was it? Could that have been that late?
It could have been. Yeah. Yeah,
Is it,
actually it could have been because I think we drove to Houston, or sorry, we drove to New Orleans from Houston with my family, and I remember I did part of the driving that year. Like I had my permit or something.
oh
So
yeah.
so the thing I remember from that World's Fair, the one thing that stuck in my mind is my dad went to buy us all soft drinks, the four of us. And I remember it was like $14 for four soft drinks. And I remember just being like totally shocked. Like that was that was one of those dad moments, like $14 for four. That's ridiculous, it is ridiculous.
Even
But
today, it's still ridiculous.
but I think it could be $14 for one soft drink today. I mean, it's yeah.
Well, if you've ever been to Knoxville, Tennessee, you see the remnant of the 82 World's Fair. They still have the kind of the structure up there, the ball,
Okay.
and there's a great Simpsons episode too about where they go to Knoxville and see the I think it
The
was
ball.
it became a hat store or something like that. Yeah,
Haberdashery.
yeah, something like that. So yeah, I've been to Disney a few times.
Did you go as a parent?
I did.
Yeah.
I've
How
been
was
to
that?
Disney World and I've been to Disneyland as a parent. Um, it was kind of like I mentioned that Walt wanted. I mean, it kind of took me back to being a kid. I was much more into that than kind of making sure that my kid had a good time, I guess. But
You're like, you're on your own.
but here's the thing that I do remember about that, and this is kind of speaks to how the quality part of Disney is that I was never a big roller coaster fan. I'm just not into that. But whenever I rode like Space Mountain at Disney, I always felt like, well, this is going to be safe because they wouldn't do something that's put me at risk. And I found that my son was the same way. He also didn't like roller coasters too much, but we'd be in line for roller coaster and I'd look over and he'd be like saying to himself, "In Walt we trust, in Walt we trust." And this idea that as long as it's Disney, it's not going to break. It's not like some carnival that's in a parking lot of the grocery
Right.
store.
It's not. You're not riding the Krusty the Clown roller coaster.
Yeah, and I think there's
Krusty Land.
something to that even a little kid, or maybe especially a little kid, sees something about quality. Most of these Disney movies, other than the ones that we were talking about, the Dean Jones type movies,
Right.
they're pretty high quality. They don't churn out a lot of junk. If you like that genre, and if you don't like the genre, then then there's no point in talking about it. But as far as the genres go, it's pretty high quality stuff, and they demand a certain level of quality.
And now Disney, of course, owns the Star Wars franchise, and that's a whole other ball of wax. Because actually, I have to say, I have felt for the most part that a lot. So we have Disney Plus, right, on our TV. I felt that a lot of the content on Disney Plus, Star Wars related content, is not very good. They are definitely churning out as much as they can, trying to figure out every single story about all these obscure characters that you may or may not care about. If you're a casual Star Wars fan like I am, I mean, I'd consider myself a probably. I'm sitting within the view of like 2 or 3 Star Wars toys on my desk right now. And so I'm probably a bigger Star Wars fan than most people. I was 7 when the original came out and went to see it with my grandparents in the theater. And, you know, it had a big impact on my life. But now I turn on like the Kenobi series that was on Disney Plus was terrible. It was just the acting was really bad and it was just not fun to watch. Now I will say that Andor, I don't know if you've seen Andor, but that was actually really good. Best Disney Star Wars thing I've seen in a long time. But it just it's just become almost too Disney. You know, like Star Wars and Disney makes it, because Star Wars had a little bit of a dark edge to it before, and it doesn't seem to as much anymore. But I'll say that's the difference with Andor. If anybody's listening and they're a Star Wars fan and they don't like what Disney's done to it, watch Andor, and I think you'll see a little bit of that dark Empire Strikes Back kind of vibe again.
Yeah, it's amazing what their assets include now. I mean, not only now they own Pixar and Marvel and the Lucas thing, and they bought the aforementioned Muppets a long time ago, and now they own 20th Century Fox and Searchlight and ABC and ESPN and Nat Geo and History Channel and
Yeah,
Lifetime
it's
and
just
A&E and Hulu, and it's like it's oversaturation, man.
well, and it's a lack of diversity, right? It just has become, if it's just one company, and I don't mean diversity as in, you know, racial or ethnic or whatever. I'm talking diversity like just coming from different sources. You know, if it's all coming from the same big vat of goop, it's all going to taste the same.
I think there's something to that. Yeah, I think that's true. I think that um, they just want to buy up everything that has to do with kids, and yeah,
Entertainment.
there's probably yeah, and I think
and
there's probably
and and honestly, you know, people our age, baby boomers who still think this is, you know, the coolest spaceship ever built. And that's, I held up a snow speeder for those of you listening. And you know, it's ultimately our nostalgia connected with our kids, because one of my favorite things to do with my son is to watch the Harry Potter series together, or to watch Star Wars, you know, the original 3 movies together. We'll do that and we both enjoy it, you know, and it's something that appeals to our generation plus our kids' generation.
well. Let me tell you a couple of other maybe lesser known stories about Disney. Have you ever heard of the Lily Bell? The Lily Bell.
Was it a ship?
It was a train,
A train.
and
Okay.
his named after his wife. His wife was named Lily, and so he was really into trains, as you could tell with the different parks and having the trains at all the parks. He was really, that was part of his boyhood. His dad's cousin was a train conductor, and even Walt was what they called a news butcher. I guess that's the guy that just sells like candy and newspapers on the train.
Oh
He
yeah.
did
Well,
that like
that's what Edison did on the train for a while too.
Thomas Edison.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So then when he got rich, he had 5 acres of land and a big house. He called the house Yensid Valley. Yensid is Disney spelled backwards.
Ah.
Um, and he built a backyard railroad with a tunnel in it with a real train that went, it was like a half a mile long with 11 different switches and overpasses and all this. And he had his Imagineers build a steam engine, and he like from like 1870s, and called it the Lily Bell. And he'd invite all these celebrities over to his house. He was kind of like Michael Jackson's Neverland before
Right.
before
Right.
Neverland, right?
Right. Yeah.
So people could come over, and this trains would hold up to 12 people, have like 4 or 5 different cars in it. Celebrities would come to parties, and this is like the early 1950s. But in 1953, he let one of his guests drive the train, and the train took a turn too fast. The train derailed, damaged the train. It was a steam engine, right? So it expelled a jet of hot steam, and it burned a 5-year-old girl.
Oh goodness.
And after that, he closed the train down for good. You can still see that train at that San Francisco museum that I
Oh,
mentioned.
they have the train engine.
They have the train, and then the track is rebuilt somewhere in California. They have the track, and then they have replicas of that train at the different Disney parks. But there's an example of you just think nothing could go wrong and then all of a sudden you got a friend that drives a train off the tracks,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I would be quite annoyed at that person, but kind of shame on Disney for letting the guy drive it. And I'll bet there was a little drinking
You
involved.
think? Yeah. I didn't even think you could derail a train like purposely.
By
Like,
going, well, I'm
watch,
sure it wasn't on purpose, but
hold my
yeah, I
beer.
mean, if you think about it, if there's a sharp turn and it's going really fast, it's just momentum's just gonna tip it over.
Here's an interesting fact about a Disney. So back in the 50s, when Disneyland first opened, they had a Mexican restaurant there called Casa de Fritos. And as you can imagine, it was sponsored by Frito-Lay, right? And they would give you free Fritos at every meal. But unlike today, it wasn't, I mean, Mexican food was a lot more exotic than it is, today.
Sure.
One of the salespeople at Disney, he noticed that the staff was throwing away tortillas at the end of the day. And he was like, no, you shouldn't throw. That's just lost food. Instead, why don't you fry them and make tortilla chips out of them? And so they started doing that. And then they were so popular, people wanted those chips. They started making them in larger quantities, and they started bagging them and selling them in Southern California.
Doritos.
Eventually, they had expanded, and it became Doritos. You're exactly right.
Sorry to steal your thunder, but I thought that was where you were going.
That's where I was going. So Doritos weren't invented by Disney, but they were invented at Disneyland. Yeah. Isn't that crazy?
Wow. Yeah.
I don't know if you've heard of the Banksy spoof of Disneyland. Have you ever heard of that called Dismaland?
Is Banksy an artist?
You know Banksy, right? Yeah, the artist, the anonymous artist that causes trouble everywhere.
I've heard of Banksy, yes.
Yeah. So he has a place in England. I don't think it's around anymore, although some of it I think is still around in Bristol, England, called Dismaland. Okay. And this is kind of it's art, but it's a statement, and it's speaking about some of the things you were talking about before, crash commercialism. He called it a bemusement park.
Oh goodness.
And it was really super dark. Like, you would not want to take your kids to this place. It would have like a pumpkin carriage like Cinderella, but it would be crashed kind of like Princess Di, and it would have a lifeless body of Cinderella in the carriage.
Dismaland.
Yeah, Dismaland.
I mean, that sounds like it'd be a great Halloween themed thing.
Dude, and not only, here's the most Halloweenish thing. There's a carousel like there is at Disneyland, with the horses. And then there's a guy sitting on the carousel, an actor who's dressed up like a butcher, and he's got boxes next to him that say lasagna, and he's got a knife with blood on it, and over his head are one of the carousel horses hanging like you'd see hanging in a butcher's. Like he's making lasagna out of the carousel horses. But kids can still ride I watched a YouTube video, and there's kids still riding on this carousel like it's a regular carousel
at Dismaland.
And then this butcher is there with a bloody knife that having just made. Yeah, so it's a very subversive kind of anti-Disney place. So if you're not quite into Disney, maybe check out Dismaland.
Yes. Hey, honey, you tell the family you're going to Dismaland, and they hear Disney, and then you arrive.
And it's very it looks very much. It looks like kind of a post-apocalyptic Disneyland. Like, it has the castle, but it's super creepy looking, and
kind of falling down.
Everything is in disrepair, but that's kind of how it was designed. And the logo looked exactly like Disneyland. I don't know how.
Was there any sort of cease and desist?
But the thing is, Banksy's anonymous. So who do you even?
Well, I mean, how can Banksy be truly anonymous if this is a place, right? I mean, like it feels like it'd be hard to.
It just propped up.
If you're doing, wow, all right. So you can see YouTube videos of people at Dismaland, huh?
Yeah, it's really if that at all interests you, I'd check it out. If it sounds revolting to you, do not check it out.
Okay.
So he died a pretty young man. He was
a big
65,
smoker and drinker,
big smoker. Yeah, and he smoked with no filters.
Oh,
cigarettes with no
that's
filters.
how
And
men did it back then.
and he was diagnosed with lung cancer in November of 66 and died in December.
Wow.
Over his life, he made 81 films. He opened Epcot opened after he 16 years after he died. It finally opened, but it wasn't the city that he thought it was going to be. It was
Yeah,
kind of a
as a
permanent
matter of
World's
fact,
Fair.
I heard that Roy and the board of Disney took it in a totally different direction than
Yeah.
what Walt had originally wanted, but in a way that made it commercially viable.
Yeah, it's a theme park, as we talked about before. So I guess the kind of the unpleasant legacy is there's a lot of kind of looking back and saying, was he a racist? Well, I think you could say that about a lot of people that were born in 1901. If you look
Yeah.
at some of his work, it definitely doesn't do him any favors. In the Three Little Pigs, the original Three Little Pigs, the wolf was portrayed as a Jewish peddler. There was a lot of kind of anti-Semitism that was coming out. He even gave the Nazi filmmaker Leni Riefenstahl, he gave him a tour of his studios, and that was after Kristallnacht. So I mean, this was now he wasn't an ardent kind of going out there and publicly supporting Nazis or anything, but just kind of the vibe was kind of anti-Semitic. He was involved with this thing called the Motion Picture Alliance. It was kind of a anti-union and anti-Semitic group. If you look at Dumbo, there's some characters, the Black Crows that are in Dumbo are considered to be pretty racist. The Song of the South, you can't even find that movie out anymore. It's so and unless we think that was a product of the times, even at the time, it was pretty racist. The NAACP wanted to meet with him before he released the film, and he kind of blew off their meeting, didn't meet with them, and then released the movie anyways.
Yeah.
Just this week, I think, is the end of the ride called Splash Mountain, which was based on the Song of the South. So I think this week is the last ride ever. They're going to repurpose that ride and make it something else. But he also kind of had a unwillingness to hire minorities at Disneyland. So it doesn't look great on his behalf if we look back and look at kind of his racist attitudes. And then the big one that did people ask about Disney, the rumor is that he's frozen somewhere, right? That he's cryogenically frozen.
Right, along with Geronimo and Einstein.
That's not true. His ashes are actually in Glendale, where he's buried. He did have some interest in that. Like, he looked into it, I think, or people came to him with that. I mean, I think if you have that business, you're gonna come to people like him. That are kind of interested in the future,
that have a lot of money and
right.
might actually believe in something like that.
Oh, I guarantee I could make you a list of all the people that have been contacted in our time right now, and we'd probably come up with a pretty good list of people that have been contacted about having. I have not been contacted,
No, me neither.
For that. So he's not frozen. But in a way, like I mentioned at the very beginning, kind of coming full circle, he kind of doesn't need to be frozen, because if there's anybody that is going to come close to immortality from the kind of Mexican Dia de los Muertos
perspective
view of immortality, I think it would be this guy. I mean, I can't imagine a time where people aren't consuming Disney IP at some
No,
point.
it's gonna go well. I mean, it will eventually. Everything shifts, but for the foreseeable future, for our lifetime, for our children's lifetime, and probably their children's lifetime, he's going to be synonymous with all the things that Disney is synonymous with today.
Well, I guess I was thinking, if they buy all the IP that exists, then by definition.
Oh, true. Yeah, eventually we're going to be in the great state of Disney.
Right, and Dirt Nap City will be a Disney production. We got to get this one out before we become part of the company.
Right. Yeah, well, if they want to offer enough cash and enough Doritos, I'm in.
Then, this will be the first episode that we delete.
Right. This will be censored. Sorry, the Disney family has some issues with what you said.
Well, that was Walt Disney, Kelly. And going back to the beginning, I think he's got one of the the most iconic autographs. When you
Yes.
see that signature, it just does something to you. It either brings you back to childhood or it revolts you, but you definitely will have a reaction to that signature they had. And probably because he was an animator, it was cool looking. But
Yeah.
man, I love that signature.
Lots of flourishes. Well, and Chuck Jones. It's funny that I thought of Chuck Jones before I thought of Disney. But
Yeah.
remember Chuck Jones at the end of the Looney Tunes cartoons. But yeah, no, that was amazing, and certainly a lot of things, a lot of little tidbits I didn't know about as far as his life goes. I do have to apologize, like I said, to Emily, because she was wanting to be a guest on a show we talked about Disney, but it would have been funny too, because Disney was on my list, and it would have been funny if we had both done it again today.
Sorry, Emily.
That's all right. She knows other stuff too. Well, Alex, thank you. I feel a lot more readily armed to watch Disney programming and to visit Disney parks and to do all the things Disney with a little bit more knowledge and backstory about Mr. Walt.
All right. Well, thank you for listening, Kelly. Thank you for listening, everybody. And join us again next week for another exciting episode of Dirt Nap City. Bye.
Later.